all about bringing you cutting edge. Should I start again? Welcome to the Sonal Holland Wine Academy Knowledge Summit, where we bring you cutting edge knowledge on wines from all around the world. Today, we have a very, very exciting session for you, where we're going to deep dive into one of the most thrilling wine regions from around the world. And yes, I am talking about the Barossa wines. Barossa region, which makes wines that compare with and compete with some of the best in the world. And today I'm joined by a very exciting panel of speakers who are going to join me and share their knowledge and their insights on Barossa and its wines with us for everybody's benefit. So I'm thrilled and I'm honored to welcome our panelists today. And let me start with introducing them. We have Daniel Swincer, Chief Winemaker for Pernod Ricard Winemakers Australia. Welcome, Daniel. We also have Scott Hazeldine, the Chief Executive at Barossa Australia. Thrilled to have you with us, Scott. And we have Annabelle, who is the Head of Education at Barossa Australia. Annabelle, so exciting to have you join us today.
Thank you, Sonal. Good to see you.
Thank you. So we are being joined by our panel speakers straight from Australia. Annabelle's at her office in Australia, and we have Daniel and Scott together in this very exotic location, which I'm about to ask you about. Where are you both? The background looks superb.
Well, so now we're sat here in the Barossa cellar, which is a lovely purpose-built building here in the Barossa. It is the home of Barossa Australia, but more importantly, it houses a fantastic collection of about 7,000 bottles of wine sourced from all the producers of the Barossa. And it was built by a group called the Barons of the Barossa, who are essentially a philanthropic fraternity. And their goal is to promote the Barossa, both with food, wine, history in there as well. So it's a really fantastic location. And we're pretty lucky to be sat here talking to you from here.
I'm very envious. I could easily use that background in all my videos as well. I mean, that background looks superb. But since we touched upon being in a cellar, I'm going to take the opportunity to ask both you and Dan, could you give us an update on the 2023 vintage? It just got over. I'm sure you've just kind of finished the vintage. So we'd love to know what the 2023 vintage in Barossa is looking like this year.
Yeah, sure. Well, do you want to lead off, Dan?
I can kick off. It was definitely, in Australian terms and Barossa terms, definitely a cooler, milder year. So we started off with quite a lot of spring rainfall leading into a cooler, wetter growing season, which I think in certain ways presented some challenges, but we've come out of the year and every year is different. And that's the great thing about making wine. We're an agricultural business. The weather dictates what we do, but we've got some fantastic whites, and we'll talk about it later on, the diversity of what we do here in the Barossa. So our Eden Valley Rieslings are looking exceptional. We've got some lovely Chardonnays from up in Eden Valley as well. On the red front, Cabernets turned out fantastically well this year. I think the cooler vintage really helped the Cabernets keep that varietal typicity. And I'd generally say the Shiraz, which I guess the Barossa is most renowned for, definitely in the more elegant, restrained spectrum this year. There was bigger berries, bigger bunches, so probably not as big and dense as we traditionally see out of the Barossa, but really happy with how the vintage has turned out and some really interesting wines to come out.
Lovely. Sounds great. Sorry, did you have something to add?
No, I would agree entirely there. So now I think a really interesting one, as Dan hinted on, a really late start and a late finish. So there is a number of still slightly bleary-eyed winemakers roaming around the valley, just recovering even at this late stage in the year.
Excellent. Really happy to hear that. Another quick question for Dan. Dan, you are the chief winemaker at Pernod Ricard Winemakers Australia, which is like a wine empire with an imposing presence all across the world. But I really am tempted to ask you, what are the benefits, if you can share with us, in your opinion, of being such a large producer in a region like Barossa?
I think importantly, yes, we are a large producer, but we're based here in the Barossa. This is where our business began 176 years ago on the banks of Jacobs Creek. So we are anchored here. We do have the benefit, I guess, of being a larger producer in that we do source fruit from multiple regions. But I think the important people for a business of our size is the people, the skill set and knowledge that we really have to rely on, not just in winemaking and grape growing, but in all areas of winery operation. And also the resources we can call on, the technology in our winery. So, we are a big business, but we make wines from, million case blends down to, bottling, just over 100 cases of products that we release in our cellar door. So yes, we are a big business, but we make wine from, large blends that are available in 80 countries throughout the world, through to stuff that's just available at the cellar door, and the little things that we experiment with in our winery. But I think the benefit is the skill set, the knowledge, the experience, and it's about the people that we can call on to help us make our wines and showcase what we do as a company, but also as a country in terms of winemaking.
Jacob's Creek has a fantastic reputation and a big following of drinkers in India. It is in fact the #1 imported brand in the country, and I know for a fact that 9 out of 10 people would say their first glass of wine was, if it's an imported wine, it would have to be the Jacob's Creek. If it's Indian, it probably would be something different. But 9 out of 10 people would say that their first glass of imported wine that they tried in India would be Jacob's Creek. It has a fantastic and an enviable market share. Allow me to just continue this discussion and ask you, Dan, what is Jacob's Creek's philosophy in terms of winemaking? There is no doubt that you are making and producing a lot of wine, but how do you what's the philosophy in terms of building consistency whilst also driving quality across all the ranges of Jacob's Creek wines?
I think it's a multifaceted question. I think the first thing around the philosophy, or what do we want to achieve with our Jacob's Creek wines, particularly say the wines available in the Indian market, the Jacob's Creek Classic Shiraz Cabernet or the Chardonnay or the sparkling wines. First and foremost, I think when I think about Jacob's Creek being available in so many countries around the world, we want to showcase what we do really well in Australia. So for our classic varietal wines, we want them to showcase that pure, our interpretation of variety. So Shiraz, you should see the lovely, bright, fresh fruits. We want it to be medium-bodied, some spicy red fruits, Cabernet bringing in some structure. So we want to showcase the variety and the purity of what we can do here in Australia. We don't want them to be swamped by oak or the well on the street. Sweet. We really want to showcase what we can do with Chardonnay. Should have the hallmarks of nice, peach and melon, integrated with a bit of Malo character and oak. So it's about actually showing those purity of variety and what we can do, and they should be well made. And I think when we refer to them as classic, I like to think of them as a classic interpretations of that style. But in terms of Jacob's Creek, we do have a broad portfolio. We do go from our, entry-level classic wines up to, single vineyard interpretations of Barossa, wine from 100-year-old vines. We have a very broad portfolio, but understanding what our consumers' wants and desires is really important for us. So we do have a lot of innovation. We are trying different things. So, our double barrel range is a different interpretation. We have our Cool Harvest range, which is, a more approachable style in that light and fresh spectrum. So with our portfolio and with what we do, there's a very wide spectrum of wines and the things that can appeal to people across the world. But the important thing that goes into the quality of the wines, it's always the fruit. So,
yes.
We can't make wines from anything else other than grapes. So
Absolutely.
We're bringing them in. For us, the quality starts in the vineyard, and whether that's our entry-level commercial wines, we're making sure our winemakers are getting out in the vineyard. They're seeing what how the fruit looks, making the decision on the picking date. And that's all the way through to our top-end wines as well. So we're aligned for us on our grower base. We only grow about 20% of our fruit on our own vineyards, and we have private growers that grow the rest. So our relationship with our growers is super important to what we do, whether it's here in the Barossa, in the Riverland, Langton Creek, or down into Pernod. So I guess.
Thank you for sharing that, Dan, because one of the questions I also wanted to ask was, Barossa now enjoys this rich history of over 170 years of winemaking, as you correctly touched upon it. But at one end, whilst it's all about preserving tradition and history and celebrating it, it's also about moving forward, understanding styles that consumers seek today. And so there is this constant pull and push towards preserving the history, but also throttling forward, innovating, and sort of taking more consumers into the fold and being able to cater to their styles. So thank you for sharing with us what is happening at Pernod Ricard. But Scott, did you want to add to that in terms of what else are you seeing other Barossa winemakers and the rest of Barossa doing in terms of preserving history, but also innovating and evolving their wines at Barossa?
Yeah, sure. So now I think, the region is justifiably proud of its long winemaking heritage and legacy there. And I think those of us here today are really conscious that the strengths of the Barossa exist through some of the work of our forefathers and those that have gone before there as well. And you see that day to day, I guess, in that we've got this incredible stock of old vine material here in the Barossa, which is unmatched pretty much. And I think there's a real feeling amongst winemakers and grape growers dealing with that material that they're custodians of those special patches of Barossa dirt. But I guess there's always been a sense of progression and involvement here in the region as well, right. Sonal. And I think the Barossa has always been able to look at itself and see where it could improve and where it could move, and whether that's investment in new generations coming into the industry or stylistic shifts in wine styles. So we're seeing that all the time there as well. And I think the region's as dynamic as it has ever been. So you have, the big names of the Australian industry headquartered here and very much connected to the region. You've got a raft of really strong family-owned, medium-sized companies. And then you've got a whole collection of smaller guys trying lots of different things. And I guess all of that encompasses the spirit of the region for me.
I agree. I couldn't agree with you more. I think it's so important to have large scale as well as smaller scale producers, because that's really what drives innovation, isn't it? That also drives a healthy exchange of ideas and being able to compete also at some level, at a healthy level, to create something better collectively for tomorrow and today, so on. Annabelle, I'm going to jump over to you and quickly ask you, because we've touched upon the diversity of Barossa, and there is absolutely no doubt that Barossa not only has a diversity of climate, but also a diverse range of wines. It's not just the Barossa Shiraz, but we also have Grenache, we have Rieslings, we have Chardonnays coming from the Barossa. So how do you find, as somebody who is hemming education at Barossa Australia, how do you find you're being able to communicate this exciting diversity that Barossa brings to the table?
Thanks, Sonal. Yes, it's always interesting when I present the Barossa Wine School, whether it be to enthusiastic drinkers or to trade and media, is that there are over 40 varieties of wine grapes grown in the Barossa. However, we have what we call our hero varieties. And obviously Shiraz is our main hero variety, with over 60% of the grapevines grown being Shiraz. And then with our whites, it's the Riesling that is our hero variety. And then beyond that, in white wines, we also celebrate the Chardonnay and Semillon, and then increasingly Viognier. And then with the reds, we have Shiraz, Cabernet Sauvignon, Grenache, and Mataro. So when we start presenting about Barossa, we start with Riesling and Shiraz, because that's a really good starting point for people to understand what comes from the Barossa. And then as we go through the Barossa Wine School, we then expand into these other varieties. And then once people have grasped those top 6 varieties, we then begin to extend out into varieties such as Montepulciano or Pinot Gris, which are both varieties that are doing very, very well from the Barossa as well. So it's a really exciting way of being able to present about our wine story, starting from the basics up to the more complicated.
That is a lot of grape varieties you just mentioned there. I was tempted to ask you, is there anything that's not growing at the Barossa at the moment?
Oh, yes, there is. But what's fantastic about the growers and the wineries in the Barossa is that, as both Scott and Dan have talked about, is they're always looking to innovate. And so in the Barossa at the moment, because we're very aware of climate change and also very aware of looking at what our consumers need and desire, that we're looking to new varieties. And so we're very lucky that we've got Yalumba Nursery in the Barossa, where they are importing a whole range of different varieties and then testing the varieties out in the Barossa with the growers and the winemakers, so that we can better understand what grows well in the Barossa and what suits what our drinkers are looking for.
Yes, but I think we're also driving a very important point when you share this with us, Annabelle, which is, you know, for a lot of Indian trade, they tend to feel, there is absolutely no doubt that the Shiraz is the hero variety from Barossa, but one shouldn't just stop there.
No.
One should explore more diversity and have more such varieties and different styles of wines from the Barossa region on their wine portfolios, and subsequently even for sommeliers and people in the trade and educators to study and teach and promote other styles and other grape varieties coming from the Barossa region. Because for a lot of our importers, they tend to feel, oh, I've got a Barossa Shiraz, so I've covered Shiraz. I mean, I've covered Barossa now, and I can now look at other regions, or I can look at other countries, not understanding and perhaps not knowing that there's so much to be explored out of Barossa. So for all of those of you listening in today, all our viewers, please understand that Barossa is not just about Shiraz, but really incredible Cabernet Sauvignons, Mataro, Grenaches coming through, as much as Riesling, Semillons, Viogniers, and so on and so forth. So there's so much to be discovered, and you should really be pushing the boundaries of your own offerings to bring to the table all this exciting diversity that Barossa has to offer. I want to quickly ask this question, and Annabelle and Scott, either of you could take this question, but for somebody who's nurturing their love for wines as a consumer, as an enthusiast, or for somebody who's looking to forward their career in the world of wines as a professional, something we do and we feel very passionate about at Sonal Holland Wine Academy. But what, in your opinion, at Barossa Wine School, do you think the role wine education plays in forwarding the culture of wine and understanding of Barossa in India and around the world? What role does education play?
Well, I'll start off there, and then if you've got something to add. So first of all, I mean, education expands everyone's knowledge. It doesn't matter what the education is on, and knowledge makes us confident in the topic that we are talking about and sharing. And so wine education is really important in building, whether you're an enthusiastic wine drinker and beyond, building your knowledge. And importantly, there is a language to wine, just as in any other specialty, there is a language. So what wine education does is it gives you that language, that you learn the language, and then you learn how to communicate in that language, which means that then it opens you up to a whole new community as well, because then you discover a community of people who also speak the same language. And then my experience through my wine education journey is that once I learnt the language of wine and became confident and comfortable with it, I then learnt how to then communicate it back to people in a way that inspired them and made them enthusiastic to try what I was talking about. And I think also the thing about wine education is it's not just about the wine. You learn about, obviously, the fantastic wines that you can drink, but you also learn about different places, and you learn about the people who are so important in the creation of wine. So it's you can go around the world just in drinking a glass of wine.
I'm very, very inspired by what you're just saying, Annabelle, because it's so relatable. You know, as I studied about wines, right from WSET level 1 all the way through to the Master of Wine level, I've personally experienced how my own appreciation for wine increased, but also this, you know, when you say the word confidence, it's a certain level of effortlessness in being able to communicate about wine and being able to speak with utter confidence, something that I would have never been able to do if I wasn't backed with education, because I would have always felt at the back of my head, if I didn't have the education and the credentials, that I'm faking it. And I didn't ever want to feel like that, you know. So how beautifully put. Thank you for that answer, Annabelle. Scott, what is your opinion? A quick word on maybe what you believe wine education does for a professional or an enthusiast.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I'm incredibly impressed with the education offerings that exist out there currently as well. And I'm not that old, but I can see the difference of when I sort of came through and was looking for stuff. And I think the beauty, as Annabelle has hinted, is that it allows us, through things like the Barossa Wine School, to have a conversation with a student and a drinker, you know, in far-flung places of the world, actually bring a little bit of the Barossa to them without them having to get on a plane and come here as well. So it's a really important tool to pass that knowledge and have that conversation there as well. And for me, what it allows is just it allows you to see the wood from the trees and gives you a clearer path to that knowledge as well. So, you know, we're a huge supporter of wine education in general and see the benefits daily.
I'm endorsing every sentence you've said. I've always said to professionals who come study with us, two things. One is that no amount of knowledge ever goes to waste. You know, nothing you've ever learned. At that point in time, if you're educating yourself on a particular course, you might not understand its relevance in your life at that point in time. But at some point in the near future, whether it's an interview you're taking or whether it's somewhere where you're trying to demonstrate your expertise, you can always draw upon that knowledge at that moment in time, and it'll allow you to come across as more credible, more in control of what you're saying, and so on. And so I always say that educating is the best form of self-investment, is the one that pays the highest rate of interest. So we're actually really thrilled to partner with the Barossa Wine School and with you, Scott and Annabelle, to bring some of the finest courses on Barossa wine education here in India, both for trade professionals as well as for enthusiasts. We're really proud to be partnering with you on this initiative. And I want to take this opportunity right now, in fact, to thank you for the wonderful support that you've been extending to us in India. We're excited to bring Barossa courses here in India, especially the Introduction to Barossa course, which is just the perfect entry point for somebody who's exploring the world of wine beyond maybe a WSET level 3, where he's thinking that, okay, now I want to get into some level of specialization. You know, I want to start studying about certain very key and classic regions from around the world by sort of deep diving and taking a closer look at these regions. So the Barossa to introduction, I beg your pardon, but the Introduction to Barossa course is just that perfect entry point for both the professional and an enthusiast to begin deep diving through that. And Annabelle, do at this point also share with us, what are the levels of courses are there to be explored beyond the Introduction to Barossa beyond?
So with the Barossa Wine School, we have first of all, we have our online offerings, which would be complementary to the Introduction to Barossa, which you're running. And the online offerings are available to anywhere around the world at any time. They are the Barossa Explorer and the Barossa Adventurer. And then obviously there's the Introduction to Barossa, which so now you are delivering for us. And then from there it moves on on to Barossa Wine School Level 1, which is a 2.5 hour session. And if people take the exam at the end of it and are successful, they become a Barossa enthusiast. And we have thousands of Barossa enthusiasts around the world, literally. And then we move on to the Barossa Specialist, which is basically an 8-hour course. And that is then followed for what many people aspire to do the 5 to 6 day fully immersive course in the Barossa, where we take our students to any number of vineyards, wineries. They get to meet the growers, the winemakers, taste the wine, plus of course have some delicious meals and see the beautiful sights of Barossa. And at the end of that, if people choose to take the exam and are successful, then they become a Barossa Master, which
I love the sound of that.
Yeah, many people are aspiring to, and we have slowly built up Barossa Masters around the world over the last 10 years. So we look forward to seeing your wine communities in Australia.
Yes, for sure, Annabelle, because I see, even logically, I see no reason why someone in the trade or someone who loves wines shouldn't be taking this course. I mean, Australia has a lion's share of the imported wine market in India. A lot of it is driven by, the wines at Jacob's Creek, among others. And all the, you mentioned Yalumba and so many other such exciting brands. Barossa is the most prominent region from among the Australian wines in India for its presence. So there is always more than one Barossa wine listed at a restaurant, and more than at least half a dozen that are available at a retail store in India, particularly the more modern, sophisticated ones, retail stores that represent the retail of today. So there should be absolutely no reason why every professional out there, whether you work in the trade or you're an enthusiast, or you're working on the floor as a sommelier, shouldn't be taking an introduction to Barossa course and every course thereafter, and then become like the Barossa master. I'd love that. I think I might embark on that journey myself. I'm very lured by the word master anyway. So it's not on its own, but just, the Barossa master would be wonderful to have.
Yeah.
Quickly switch back to Dan to ask, Dan, while we were interacting, a thought came to my head, which is about, you have to ask about climate change today, right? It's the most pertinent question, and this sword looming over every winemaker's head. It's a very important, pertinent issue for the wine industry. So, and Barossa is anyway gifted with plenty of warmth and sunshine. So it really is at the edge of, suffering the perils that can come from climate change. So according to you, and again, Scott can take this question too, but what are you at Jacob's Creek, or Scott, what is Barossa as a whole doing to address and endure the longevity of its vineyards, or to ensure that the styles at some level still continue to remain elegant for consumers?
I think, every vintage is unique and different. So yes, climate's changing, how we grow grapes is changing. We've looked at planting alternative varieties. We were talking about those earlier. We have them on our own vineyard on the banks of Jacob's Creek. We've got 8 different varieties, but still the majority of what we're growing on the valley floor is Shiraz. How are we adapting to changing climate or different vintages or more extreme weather events is probably more of the concern is our knowledge, our experience investing in technology. We're lucky in the Barossa that we have secured good water in terms of ability to irrigate, and I think that's key for the longevity and the development of the Barossa over the last 20 years. And using technology such as spatial data from satellites to understand the water capacity, the water holding of your soils, what does the vine need? So humans are smart. We adapt, we evolve, we will deal with the challenges that are thrown up. As winemakers, it's about being out and understanding the impact on the vines. And stylistically, I think the wines have evolved anyway from what the market requires more than what the climate has driven us to do. But it's fantastic, with varieties like Grenache, they like heat, they like the dry years, they want that. So we're already blessed with some varieties that deal with the heat. what we do is we look at also what varieties perform better in different areas and subregions of the Barossa, and we'll talk about it later, how diverse the Barossa is. So we find that Chardonnay and Riesling is going to be more prevalent up in Eden Valley, where it's a bit cooler, much cooler nights, retaining that natural acidity in those wines that we particularly are looking for in the wines we make. So we'll adapt and we'll evolve to the conditions, because that's what humans do, and we'll work to it. I think new varieties are an element of it, but I'm making the most of the varieties that we're most used to and what the consumers are after and what Barossa is known for, such as, Shiraz, Grenache, Cabernet, also the Chardonnay and Riesling. So there's other things that we can do, and we can talk about later in terms of what are we a business doing to mitigate our impact on the environment? What's our sustainability and regeneration policies around that, which is a very important thing of how we're focusing on the future, and also engaging with what our consumers are asking for us as a business to be doing in that space.
Lovely. Scott, any thoughts on?
No, and I think that would go across the region as well. So now I think what's exciting there is that adaptation and that evolving is already well underway there, and you are seeing some really great advancements in how we're growing grapes, how effectively we're using water there as well, whether that is down to having moisture probes in your vineyard revealing really strong data which informs your decisions, whether it's simply putting mulch under vine to retain moisture. There's some really sort of practical solutions being utilised by the likes of Pernod and others there already, and so it's happening, and it's taking place.
One of the key things for us is in our own vineyards in the Barossa is looking at retaining permanent swards, building up our soil carbon content, because we know healthier soils, more carbon. We will retain that. We'll retain more water in the soils. It's better in the long run. And in wetter years like this year, having that sward can suck up that water into the mid-row as well, and keeping that green the longer. So, it's about that flexibility to deal with whatever climate change might bring to us, whatever year we have there. It's being able to react and
whatever you throw at us, we're ready. In any case, I feel New World countries, particularly led by countries like Australia and Barossa regions, will always be proactive with the amount of diversity of styles you're already growing. Organically also, you're already experimenting with what's behaving better and what's coming out better, and so on. I think a lot of this restriction is faced by countries outside of the New World, so they have restrictions, and so trying to overhaul a region to not grow Cabernet Sauvignon Merlot anymore and sort of change to Grenache would be a huge radical change in the history. But at least with countries like Barossa, it's not like that. I think innovation is so at the heart, diversity and exploring different styles through experimentation is so at the heart of the winemaking philosophy. It anyway kind of becomes a part of addressing climate change as well along the process. So that's definitely. I wanted to ask this question to all three of you as a whole, but what are your impressions collectively about the Indian wine market in terms of both opportunities and challenges? I always like to ask our audiences about, or our panel discussion speakers about, what is their impression of India?
Yes, I can kick off. I've been to India a couple of times, obviously, with Jacobs Creek being a strong performer in the market as an imported wine brand. Firstly, amazing country, but very diverse. So I don't think of India as, this one market where one thing's going to work. There's challenges in distance and state borders and distribution. But probably for me, in terms of uptake, I think about what's the occasion that people are going to drink wine at. I think in our environment where, in a Western side, we kind of have that occasion where it's a meal occasion or an aperitif occasion where we sit down and have wine. So I've been in India where sitting down at a restaurant, and alcohol in general is not sitting on the table when people are having their meal. So for me, it's like wine is amazingly diverse. It can be used at so many occasions, whether it's an aperitif occasion, it's a meal occasion, or it's out at refer to a more high energy occasion at a bar or something like that. But what is wine spaced in that in the Indian sort of culture, I guess? I love wine. I can see how it fits in my life, but its culture, I guess, is it's an amazingly rich culture in India. So how does wine fit into that and change that over time? And I think there's obviously a great opportunity,
Yes.
but it's about how do people interact with wine and how does it work in their
Yes.
life, I think, essentially.
I think there's a lot of fascination among Indian consumers about food and wine pairing, but we don't necessarily treat it as a very academic subject, and rightly so. I'm pleased by that. But when I think of wine with food, I don't necessarily think of it as a pairing per se, but more or not so much as an accompaniment, but more as a participative drink, someone that participates along with the diverse food that exists in India, where together and singularly, you kind of explore an explosion of different flavors and aromas, and sometimes in many ways, I find that wine sometimes also tends to a healthy competition with Indian flavors. And I say healthy competition because Indian food can be very robust. It's very rich. It's very diverse. There can be an explosion of aromas and flavors in your palate just with Indian food. And when a wine like a Barossa Shiraz, for example, brings that sort of richness and opulence as well to the palate, there can be a real healthy sort of a competition of sort where together they can learn to coexist, but kind of 1 + 1 can lead to 4 rather than 2, and you have a magnified effect of enjoyment. So I enjoy, how that sort of happens with a lot of Indian consumers. But thank you for sharing your thoughts as well. Annabelle, any thoughts on the Indian market?
Well, I've never had the pleasure of going to India. I hope to go there one day soon. Yes. And for me, it all comes down to the food and the occasion as well. And we are lucky enough in Australia to have some amazing Indian restaurants here. And what I love doing with my family and my friends is eating the Indian food. And then, as you say, seeing which wine styles either complement or absolutely bring that food alive. So I would hope that there's that opportunity to do that more and more in India. I know you have your own wine industry, your own growing wine industry there, yes, which I've, in my WSET studies, I had to learn about. And I think that that's a really exciting opportunity as well, to look at how we can potentially partner in India with the wineries there and look for collaborations there as well.
Fantastic. Well, we'd love to welcome you all to come to India, and I would personally be pleased to help you see India through my eyes, because my favorite joke is I'm always wearing rose-tinted glasses. I'm always very positive and upbeat about the Indian wine market, and why not? India has just signed a very successful, thriving trade agreement with Australia, the ECTA, which has come into force in the last week of December. And it's now very firmly established in place. Every importer in the country is looking to expand their Australian wine offerings, and Barossa is right at the forefront because, recall for both Australia and Barossa as a region is very high, both among trade professionals as well as among consumers. And research very clearly, sort of shows that. And it's an exciting time because, the truth is Europe has been talking about such trade agreement with India for nearly a decade. But they were just talking, and Australia did it. So actions speak louder than words. And Australia kind of just swept the carpet from under the feet of all of the countries by taking this lead on the trade agreement that it has now put in place in India. So Australian wines, I would say now will really, now already they enjoy a 40% market share in the import wine category, but going forward, it will, I think, grow leaps and bounds. And we're very pleased to be working both with the Barossa Wine School, with yourselves, as well as with Austrade, which is the Australian Trade and Investment Commission here in India, to promote, to educate, and to build solid business opportunities for Australian wines in India, with Barossa being right there at the heart of it all, so we're very pleased. So thank you again for these fantastic opportunities. All that talk about food and wine, I have to say, has got me very tempted. Now, I don't have any food in front of me, but I'm never too far away from a glass of wine. So I have the St. Hugo, which is the latest offering to hit the Indian market. I'm going to show the label slightly up close for everyone's benefit. It's the Barossa Shiraz. I have a bottle of the 2018 St. Hugo. And I'm really looking forward to tasting this. So Dan, if you can lead this tasting with me.
Yeah. Well, fortunately, we happen to have the same bottle as well. So lucky us, eh?
Yes, because no amount of panel discussion can ever be complete without enjoying some wine at the end. So
I guess importantly for us, what is St. Hugo? How does it fit into our portfolio here at Pernod Winemaker? So St. Hugo is our luxury brand in terms of and wine producer. And what I did want to do when we're tasting this, and hopefully my faithful assistant Scott can help me here, is present a map of the Barossa, because St. Hugo itself started off actually as a Cabernet out of Coonawarra. So St. Hugo itself is now a brand of wines that it stretches as a Barossa Shiraz, a Barossa Grenache Shiraz Mataro blend, Eden Valley Riesling and Eden Valley Chardonnay. But it did start off as a Coonawarra Cabernet, and there's a very clear brief and style. And we're talking about winemaking and what does it mean. I think a really important thing is to understand what you're trying to create when you're making a wine. And the brief for St. Hugo is power and elegance, which Coonawarra does amazingly well. You get Coonawarra Cabernet, lovely structure, but lovely freshness and brightness to the fruit down in a cooler region and with that great ruddy. So when we're making a Barossa Shiraz under the St. Hugo banner, we wanted to make sure that we fit that brief of power and elegance. And people might think, well, how do you do that out of the Barossa? And we're just trying to get this map done.
Right, but
it's about, I guess, having the fruit sourcing essentially is where it starts. So the Barossa is amazingly diverse. The Barossa GI as a whole is mainly, we've got, I guess, two main sections. We've got the Barossa Valley floor.
There's an enormous amount of fruit exploding and jumping out of the glass. So and some of it is dark fruit, but there's also some lovely, luscious, ripe red fruit.
So I think obviously Barossa is known, and Shiraz I think is known for that intensity of dark fruits. For me, cassis, but sort of that plum spice character.
Lots of chocolate, lots of very sweet spices coming through, really exotic spices.
Yeah, and importantly, the 2018 vintage was amazingly good in terms of some vintages are just easy and it's almost like the wines make themselves, and that was very much the 2018 vintage. We came off 2017, which was a nice wetter year, so it actually set the vines up really well. So we had lovely vine growth, well-balanced canopies, well-balanced crop loads, and then a very nice growing season. So everything just moved nicely.
Dan, I wanted to ask you that in between all of this fruit explosion and all the exotic complex aromas, I also get like this line of like an earthy graphite like quality, which kind of leads me to think that there is a certain restraint as well. Whilst there is a generosity, there is also a bit of that restraint. And is that deliberate? Is that a vintage? Is that a style? Is that a philosophy at your end?
Definitely. When we look at a map of the Barossa, we can see that the soils are amazingly diverse. So when we look at the fruit sourcing that we're trying to go with, and hopefully, can you see that? Do you want to hit that to the presentation mode? Sorry. Or you hit the, Hopefully, can you see that, Sonal, that map of the Barossa?
Yes, I can. It's right here.
Beautiful.
Yes.
We got there. Is that you can see, there's quite a difference in altitude, but if Scott just goes down, cycles through some photos and goes down, you'll see the soils are amazingly different depending on where you are, whether you're on some more alluvial soils from the this is more heavy soils at the southern end of the Barossa where our winery is based. And as we head north, if you just want to click through those, You see a bit more lighter alluvials around the Bethany Creek area. And then if we head further north, you're heading a bit lighter. And then the graphite that you're tasting, if we hit the next few slides, as we hit Ebenezer and the next one, Greenock, these tighter loams, red loams, tight soils, I call them skinnier in that they're not as, they don't have as much nutrient, as much go. There's not as much free water capacity there. So it restricts the vines back, and it gives, particularly out of Greenock, this is where we get that lovely graphite line to these wines. We get lovely fresh fruit intensity, but it's that line. Nice. That's what we're saying is giving us the power. Yeah, line to our wines. And as we go back at the southern end, if you can just, sorry, hit the next slide. One more. Hopefully, yeah, hopefully you can see I've got some stars dotted around. Like, where are we looking to source these wines from to give us that mix of power and elegance? So down south, we tend to get lovely lift and more vibrancy to the fruit, a bit more of that aromatic, but still with nice, fresh, tight tannin. As we push further north, we get much more structured, powerful wines. And so we use this fruit sourcing to drive the style of the St. Hugo wines. I put a star up in Eden Valley. We have a vineyard up there. We're still working on that to get that up to the St. Hugo quality, because we're really looking for only the best fruit out of the Barossa to go into this wine. But an important part is obviously where the fruit comes from. So we use that sub-regional sourcing out of the Barossa to drive that style differentiation in the blocks. And we pick them separately. We keep them separate the whole way through the winemaking process, so that we have that opportunity to blend. But in terms of winemaking, it's getting out in the vineyard, making that right picking decision. And for this, we use a mixture of both open fermenters, so smaller open fermenters, and also enclosed stainless steel static fermenters as well. In recent years, we've brought in this year, there'd be a small amount of small wooden vats as well. And in more recent years, we've brought in some terracotta pots as well, but not in the 2018. Yeah. But
it is,
time on
despite it being a 2018, there's a lot of refreshing acidity in the wine still. Yeah. For a 5-6-year-old wine. It's really hiding its age pretty nicely. Yes. It's very vibrant. And the tannins are still there. They're kind of halfway through melting, but there is a certain structure and a very sophisticated mouthfeel to the wine.
So when in terms of winemaking, we're looking at, obviously it's very high in fruit and it's got lovely tannin, natural tannin sitting in that. So we tend to do longer maceration on skins. We're talking 11 to 20 days on skins for Shiraz to really get that natural tannin out. And then post-press, we tend to get the ferments dry on skins, press off, and then matured in about 50% new French oak and the majority, and then 50% older majority French oak. But stylistically, we're really looking for the more elegant, less sweet profile of French oak as opposed to American oak. So we use oak as an important style driver in this one as well. But that extended time on skins gives you that tannin density, that freshness, and I think we're making a wine that's designed to age. It's not we release it at about 3 years of age, so it's made as a wine that we want to have that longevity to it, but all that lovely fruit freshness that it looks very much Barossa to me in that it's got lovely rich fruit, it's got brightness, it's got that lovely, I like that you use the word graphite tannin because that's really important to give that line, and that's really what we're chasing with our St. Hugo Shiraz.
And if I can say one more thing, I'm not tasting climate change. It's really good, the wine. So I'm not, it's not edging on being too full or too, in fact, it's a nice medium-bodied wine, and it's kind of has a lovely restraint as well to it, whilst a lot of generosity on the palate. So it's a good combination of an elegance along with a little bit of that explosion that I think Indian consumers certainly seek in their red wines. So anyway, so like I said, this is the latest wine to hit the Indian market through the Pernod Ricard team. I'm very excited. I'm actually thinking this will go brilliantly with some kind of Indian barbecue, which we refer to as tandoor Barbecue in India is referred to as tandoor food. So any kind of tandoor, whether it's tandoor mushrooms or tandoor paneer for the cottage cheese for the benefit of vegetarians, and tandoor chicken or lamb for the non-vegetarians. In fact, even some sort of a lovely biryani, an Indian biryani, which has layers of very rich flavors, could work very nicely, because there's so much juiciness in this wine that juiciness can really offset the mild spice that that exists in Indian food, and together that can be a very nice combination to explore. So yeah, I bet you got you tempted with that. So yeah, so that's thank you for sharing that wine. I really enjoyed trying that wine and tasting that wine with you, Dan. And if I may take the opportunity at this stage to thank you all for your time to share with us, this valuable insights. And we don't have opportunities like these every day. I can assure you, we don't have such knowledgeable people such as yourselves giving us so much time to for the benefit of the trade professionals and enthusiasts, everybody else who's listening today. Opportunities like these are far few, and thank you from the bottom of our hearts, and for definitely piquing our interest even beyond what it already was in Barossa as a region. So listen up, viewers, all those of you who are listening in, and to all the friends who are missing out, you can call them and let them know it's time to power up your wine knowledge and to dive even further into rich wine regions, particularly the region of Barossa, with the Introduction to Barossa course. It's available on sonalhollandwineacademy.com page. And when you take this course, you will have direct understanding of where is Barossa, what is its significance, and what makes it different, and what is its unique positioning in the wine world. Some very key production facts about Barossa, how much wines it makes, how much is exported all around the world, and again, what makes them so distinctive, the different diversity of wine styles coming from Barossa, which will directly help you with your understanding, but also help you in your conversations and help you in your jobs and your day-to-day communication about wines with your stakeholders around you. And also a wonderful piece on exploring the fascinating wine culture and the tourism that Barossa has to offer to people from all around the world who visit Barossa as a region. I've had the privilege of visiting Barossa, and let me tell you, people in Barossa are gregarious, large-hearted, kind, and they open you with welcome arms. They invite you to their homes. They open up wines for you that are older than you and will cook for you and will serve you great food. And there's just so much generosity, love, and passion that is palpable in the Barossa region. So I invite you all to plan your next holidays accordingly and to partake in a little bit of that Barossa kindness and culture that exists. And is so memorable. So again, thank you, Annabelle, Scott, and Dan, for joining us today and for making this discussion so enriching and so valuable for all of us.